Assalamu alaikum students. So today's topic will be about the third law of motion, as we have already discussed the first law of motion, the second law of motion. Let me explain what the third law of motion says. But before going to the law, I would like to show you a very simple example. Suppose there is a person who is coming towards a wall. As we know, the wall has a greater mass than the person. This person standing here will have comparatively a smaller mass. Now the person is wearing the skates and he is coming towards the wall. He will try to push the wall so that he can stop. But for a while he will feel that he is being pushed in the backward direction. Why is he feeling so? There is some force responsible who is actually pushing the person away from the wall, and yes, that force is being exerted on the person by the wall. Let's say this the force applied, this is the first object who is applying the force, and the force applied by the first object is known as the action. So we can say the force applied by the person on the wall is action, but with the magnitude of the force that the person is applying on the wall will also exert the force which has the same magnitude like the person has used. So this is the second object. He will the object wall, it will also try to exert a force on the person as a reaction force. This force is responsible for pushing the person away. So there has been so many things which became an example for Newton to deduce the third law of motion. Newton also said that if a body is exerting a force, that is a force of action, on the other object will also try to exert a force on the same body with the same magnitude. But since the person was having a lighter mass, the wall can actually exert the force on the person and the person will start going away. But the wall has a greater mass, so it will not have a greater acceleration. As we know that acceleration has an inverse relation with mass. The greater the mass, the lesser will be the acceleration. Since the person was having a lesser mass, so it can actually move in the backward direction, but the wall is having a greater mass comparatively. So like I said that many experiments have been used by Newton. So he devised the third law of motion. So what Newton said in the third law of motion, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So as I showed that the person was exerting a force on the wall, it was an action. The wall in opposition to that force also exerted a force with the same magnitude to the person. Although the velocity of both the bodies was varying, but still both the objects were actually exerting force on each other. So we can have some more examples that are following the third law of motion. Let's take an example of the gun. So this is a rifle, okay? This is a rifle. So the rifle will have some mass, obviously, and the bullet will also have some mass, okay? So it has a mass m1 and it has a mass m2. Suppose there is some gunman who has fired a bullet out of this rifle. The person who is actually using the trigger, he will feel that his shoulder is being pushed backward. Why? Because once you trigger the gun, the bullet will come out with a greater velocity. Since the mass of the bullet is lesser than the mass of the gun, it will start accelerating in this direction. Let's say this bullet is the first object in which the action has been exerted as a trigger. So the action will be on the bullet, which is a force used on the bullet. But in turn, the gun has to pay back, since The guns have a spring inside. After you trigger the bullet out, the spring will also exert a force on the gun in the opposite direction with which the gun has exerted a force on the bullet, and that force is on the other object, which is the rifle. So the rifle will also experience a force which will be a force of reaction, and this reaction will be a force on the rifle that the gunman will experience for a while. He will actually feel that his shoulder has been drifted backwards, but it will not be of greater acceleration since the mass of the gun is greater than bullet. So he will just feel it for a while and then his shoulder will come back to the original position. So here we can say that action and reaction work together but in opposite directions. So that is what Newton said. To every action there is an equal and opposite reaction but in the opposite direction. There can be a lot of examples which can show this action reaction thing. One more I'll be explaining. Like we have a rocket. And these are the gases that are coming out from the nozzle of the rocket. The rocket also has this follows the third law of motion. How? You know, at the nozzle of the rocket there are a lot of chemical reactions going on, and these chemical reactions create a great velocity inside the gases, and the gases start coming out from the nozzle in this direction, in the downward direction. So obviously the gases will experience a force that will be in the downward direction, and this force we can take as an action because the gases are the first objects that will experience the force. We can say force on gases will be the action force. But obviously to every action there is an equal reaction. The reaction is being faced by the rocket. The rocket will face the reaction in the opposite direction, and this force will be exerted by the gases on the rocket as a reaction force, and due to this reaction the rocket will start moving up and the gases will be going in the downward direction. So again we had the idea of this action reaction thing. So what we can conclude from Newton's third law of motion, that to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The reactions are the forces which are having equal magnitudes, but they are totally opposite to each other. Thank you so much.